A pair of balanced budget constitutional amendments, one offered by Republicans and the other by Democrats. Roll call votes on those measures expected at about 10:45 Eastern this morning. And now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal and ever-blessed God, strengthen our senators today to walk in your steps. Help them to walk in your humility, so that they will strive to serve. Help them to walk in your courage, so that nothing will deflect them from the path of integrity. Help them to walk in your endurance, so that discouragement will not hinder them from reaching laudable goals. Help them to walk in your loyalty, so that nothing will destroy their devotion to you. Lord, place your truth in their minds, your love in their hearts, and your kindness on their lips. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., December 14, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
The leadership time is reserved.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
Following later remarks, the Senate will be in freedom morning business for 1 hour. The majority will control the first half. The Republicans will control the final half. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of S.J.Res.10 and S.J.Res.24. Both these resolutions regard the balanced budget amendment. At approximately 10:45, then, there will be 2 votes on those resolutions. We also hope to consider the Department of Defense Authorization Conference report today, as well as the House Republican payroll tax bill. Mr. President, this has become a familiar scene on Capitol Hill. As time ticks down to the wire, the House has sent the Senate yet another bill that won't pass. Meanwhile, American families stare down a $1,000 tax increase. And on January 1st, they'll be scrambling to afford the necessities because of Americans. I can't understand the Republicans' obstructionism. Has become the Republican fallback play. Waste precious time catering to Tea Party extremists when you can be working with Democrats to compromise. Republican leaders have already spent weeks drumming up Tea Party support for legislation they knew was dead on arrival in the Senate. Now it's time to get this vote over with so real negotiations can begin to prevent a tax increase on 160 million middle-class Americans. This morning I will ask consent to vote on the House-passed bill. Democrats were ready to vote on this legislation last night, but I can't set a vote at this time in the Senate procedures without Senator McConnell's approval. And even though we already know the bill is dead, Senator McConnell wasn't ready to hold a vote on it last night. That's really an about-face from just a few hours before, even as recently as yesterday morning, Tuesday morning. On Monday, for example, when Senator McConnell urged us to take up the House bill as soon as possible, this is what he said: my suggestion is that once this legislation comes over from the House, we pass it without delay. That's what I tried to do last night, at least not pass it, but at least have a vote on it. Senator McConnell repeated that call yesterday morning, Tuesday morning. Here's what he said yesterday morning: I would suggest that our friends put the political games aside and give the American people the certainty and the jobs that they deserve. Take up the House bill, pass it right here in the Senate, and send it to the President without theatrics and without delay. Then yesterday afternoon, Senator McConnell said, quote, the first thing we need to find out is whether there are votes in the Senate to pass what the House has passed. Another direct quote. So I say to my friend, the Republican leader, let's find out whether he has the votes in the Senate to pass what the House has passed. Let's vote on this now. We knew Monday that the bill wouldn't pass the Senate. We also knew yesterday that this bill wouldn't pass the Senate, and we still know that. It won't pass the Senate. Here's why this legislation is a non-starter. I'll give you 3 of about 33 reasons why. The bill cuts unemployment benefits for 1 million Americans at a time when there's not jobs for 1 out of every 4 people seeking work. It weakens safeguards to keep our air clean and our children healthy, and the President already threatened to veto it. In fact, he hasn't threatened to veto it. He said he will veto it. Legislation written to appeal only to the extreme right wing of the Republican Party can't pass the Senate. Republicans will see that again whenever they allow us to vote on this legislation. But my friend, the Republican leader, said, let's vote on it right away. Right away was last night. So let's get this vote over with. Then we can begin serious negotiations on how to prevent a $1,000 tax hike on American families. The sooner we put this useless partisan charade behind us, the sooner we can negotiate a true bipartisan solution that protects middle-class workers. Now, Madam President, there's been a lot of talk about let's get the omnibus and let's pass it. It's not complete. There are major issues. We've made significant progress. There are still critical issues to be ironed out. There are issues that deal with foreign policy. There are issues that deal with the environment. There are issues that deal with about 7 or 8, some would refer to as game stoppers. We could complete that work, but it's something that is not done now. But there is no reason, while that work is completed, to hold up the middle-class tax cut. Congress is not going to go home for vacation. Remember, the bill that some want to pass, the omnibus bill, takes care of us, takes care of the legislatures. It's got the legislative branch appropriations in it. So we shouldn't go home until we finish the business of the American people. Preventing a $1,000 tax increase on working families is the most pressing business we have. And we're not going to allow Republicans in Congress to take care of themselves without taking care of the middle-class families as well. We hope to complete this important work soon, this week. If we can't, we should pass a short continuing resolution to keep the government open while we work to reach a compromise. We've passed short-term CRs many times before, and we should do it again if that's what it takes to prevent a tax on the middle class. The bottom line is this. It's time for the two sides to come together and to compromise. Madam President, as I told the Speaker Monday, and as I spoke here on the floor yesterday, and I've said this to my friend, the Republican leader, the House can't pass legislation that will succeed over here unless they get Democrats to support their legislation. We cannot pass legislation here because of now the Republicans have set not a majority rule, but we have to get 60 votes. We can't get 60 unless we get Republican assistance. So we need to compromise. Legislation is the art of compromise. That might take a little more time. Republicans should give Congress a few more days to finish its job rather than rushing home for our vacation. I've already talked, Madam President, about the importance of doing this legislation as quickly as we can. I also think it's extremely important that we understand that it could be done. The vote could take place. It would take 20 minutes to do that. So I ask unanimous consent that following the two scheduled votes here in the Senate to proceed, that we proceed to the consideration of H.R. 3630. That's a House-passed legislation, that got out of 430 members of Congress, it got 10 Democratic votes. That there be 2 hours of debate equally divided between the two leaders or their designees prior to vote on passage of the bill with no amendments in order prior to the vote on passage, and that the vote on passage be subject to a 60-vote affirmative threshold, which my friend, the Republican leader, seems to feel is the standard around here anymore. Further, that if the bill is not passed, it remain the pending business, and following that, I be recognized.
Is there an objection?
Madam President, reserving the right to object. Our most immediate concern at this point is that despite federal funding expiring 2 days from now, Friday night, my friend the majority leader is blocking action on the funding bill that would keep the government open. That's our most immediate concern, and we should address it first because the deadline is literally just 2 days away. That comes first. Now, my good friend the majority leader has said shutting the government down would be extreme and that it's too risky to even entertain. And that issue is just 2 days away. Everyone knows the truth is that the bill would fund our troops, our border security, and the remaining funding for the rest of the fiscal year, and it's ready to go. They were prepared to sign the conference report earlier this week until leadership on this side said don't sign the report. There's agreement on the funding bill, but no agreement and no plan at all about how we're going to pass the payroll tax cut extension in the Senate. So we ought to finish our most immediate concern first. Let me repeat that our friends across the aisle have no plan, and some might suggest no desire, to pass a payroll tax cut extension, the President's top priority. Extend unemployment insurance or ensure seniors access to medical care. They've made no attempt at all to produce a bill that can pass the Senate. It is their responsibility in the majority to do that. Instead, we've wasted week after week after week, one senseless show vote after another. Votes that one member of the Democratic Senate leadership recently admitted were designed solely to score points on millionaires. So let's deal first with the deadline that happens this Friday, 2 days from now. Fund the government through the rest of the fiscal year, and then turn immediately to the payroll tax extension that expires later in January. And let's pass the job-creating and job-saving measures the House has passed. Therefore, Madam President, I would ask consent to modify the Majority Leader's request to say as follows, that the Senate would turn to the consideration of the House bill relating to the payroll tax repeal extension immediately after the Senate passes a conference report or bill received from the House that funds the government through the end of the fiscal year.
Madam President.
Does the majority so modify the request?
Reserving the right to object. Madam President, my friend is living in a world of non-reality. Let's look where we are. The House of Representatives, which has a significant majority of Republicans, last week couldn't even pass a bill. That was in all the press. They couldn't get the votes. So what they did, in an effort to placate the far right so they could pass a bill with just Republican votes, they stuck in a bunch of issues that really are hard to comprehend. Issues dealing with the environment have nothing to do with this bill. Even a Republican senator said that bill standing alone looks okay, but jammed in with everything else, it doesn't look so good. It should be separate issues. We have issues on the so-called omnibus or spending bill that have not been resolved yet. One dealing with Cuba, very important piece of legislation in the minds of many senators. One of the senators who believes so strongly that that provision should be taken out is a Republican senator from Florida. We have issues dealing with the environment, which are extremely important. Light bulbs, coal, many other issues that haven't been resolved in this so-called omnibus. So, Mr. President, I think that everyone can see very clearly that my friends on the other side of the aisle obviously want to have the government shut down. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, they've had experience doing this. The presumptive Republican nominee, Newt Gingrich, tried that once. It didn't work so well. So I don't think it's going to work very well again. Everyone knows why the government is going to shut down, if in fact it does. We have 160 million Americans who are out there cheering for us, that we can get them the tax relief they deserve. We have well more than 1 million Americans who have been out of work for a long period of time who are cheering for us. We have business people out there who are cheering for us, that there are certain tax benefits that are important to creating jobs that we need to do before we leave here. So, Madam President, I object and ask unanimous consent that if the Senate receives from the House a bill that continues funding for the federal government through December 21st, 2011, that it be in order for the Majority Leader in consultation with the Republican Leader to proceed to the bill. Further, that the bill be read 3 times passed on all with no intervening action or debate.
Objection is heard for the first request. Is there an objection to this new request?
Madam President, I'm not sure what the Majority Leader just said.
Madam President, what I said is that I ask that if we get a bill from the House to extend to have a CR, continuing resolution, for another few days, that we are allowed to take it up. Under the rules of the Senate and the Congress, I can't initiate a CR here. It's a tax measure. Constitutionally, it has to start over there. So I've said that if the Senate receives from the House a bill that continues funding for the federal government, I said through December 21st, any reasonable time is fine with me, that it be in order for me, after I talk to the Republican Leader, to proceed to the bill.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, we don't need to do that. I mean, Representative Jim Moran, Democrat of Virginia, one of the top members on the House Appropriations Committee, said this yesterday: our bill is done. It should go to the President immediately. We're not holding it up. I can't speak for Harry Reid. I can't speak for him. As far as I'm concerned, it should be done. The government shutdown is 2 days away. We have an agreement based on what all the appropriators on the conference report are saying. We can pass that and do first things first, prevent the government shutdown. I agree with the Majority Leader. Government shutdown is a terrible idea. He has said that repeatedly. We've all said it repeatedly. And the way to avoid that is to get our work done. The work is done on the Appropriations Conference Report. We ought to get signatures on it, and we ought to pass it, and we ought to do it in the next 2 days. Now, there were a series of other competing UCs here, and I'm a little confused as to where we are.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
I object to that one, by the way, the last one we were discussing.
Madam President.
Objection is heard.
I know Congressman Moran, fine man, been in Congress many, many years. But he should step over here and talk to Senator Menendez or Marco Rubio and see how they feel about Cuba and the language in that bill that changes how they feel, which dramatically changes our relationship with Cuba. Or how about the chairman of the Environment Committee, Barbara Boxer? See how she feels about going back, in effect, to some saying the dark ages, changing light bulbs. Or how about the issues dealing with other environmental issues dealing with coal? How about talking to some of the other senators on that committee? The bill is not complete. I think we could complete it very quickly if people sat down and focused on what we need to do to get out of here. But now it has not been completed. And I don't care what Jim Moran says or Mitch McConnell says. The bill is not completed. Madam President, but what is obviously extremely clear, which is extremely clear here, my friend, the Republican leader, has talked for days. I went through what he said on Monday, what he said on 2 separate occasions on Tuesday. Let's vote on this bill now. That's what he said. It's obvious that something's happened the last few hours that suddenly they don't want to vote on their own bill. Keep this in mind. The House has passed a bill that I have said and non-Democrats have said is a dead duck. DOA, dead on arrival. It's here, it's dead, and they don't want to vote on it. You think maybe they don't want to vote on it because Republican senators are kind of embarrassed or ashamed what's in that bill? I would think so.
Madam President, I would say, speaking of embarrassment, it's that we're doing an omnibus again. And the reason we're doing an omnibus again here on the eve of Christmas is because we haven't passed our appropriation bills. We've had almost as many show votes in the Senate this year, roughly equal number of show votes, in other words, designed to fail, to go nowhere, to present a talking point for the President and his campaign, as we have on real bills that we're supposed to pass. And so here we are once again. 3 years this Democratic Senate hadn't passed a budget. 3 years we have ended up either in omnibus or CR situations. And here we are again. Now the appropriators in the House and Senate have labored long and hard. A couple of days ago, they had said they were ready to sign the report. My good friend, the Majority Leader, and the President said, don't let them sign the report. We might actually have to pass the bill. A mysterious strategy to me. All I'm saying is here, first things first. If the Majority Leader is convinced that the House-passed bill is DOA, why doesn't he start talking to the Speaker about how we might actually craft a bill that can pass both a Republican House and a Democratic Senate? And quit wasting our time here in the Senate scoring points, because the government shutdown is 2 days away. So first things first. Let's keep the government from shutting down. These other measures don't expire until the end of the month. If the Majority Leader is correct that the House bill won't pass the Senate, why don't he talk to the Speaker and work out something that can pass on a bipartisan basis? Because regretfully, I would say to my friend, the Majority Leader, the Republicans control the House. The Democrats control the Senate. Unfortunately, from my point of view, this has to be worked out. The last time I looked, Christmas is a week from Sunday. Time is a-wasting. We have fiddled all year long. All year long. One point-scoring bill after another, designed to fail, designed to divide us, designed to get no result, to give the President a talking point out on the campaign trail, and here we are, a few days before Christmas, and the silliness continues. Now, if my friend the Majority Leader is so convinced that the House-passed bill can't pass the Senate, I would say again, talk to the Speaker and work out something that can pass both the House and the Senate. Time is a-wasting.
Madam President,
Majority Leader.
Talk about a diversion. That's what we just heard. My friend, the Republican leader, has talked from the very beginning of this Congress. His #1 goal is to defeat Obama for re-election. That's not looking so good. Romney stumbling, Gingrich is plodding along, head now every place. But, Madam President, because the Republican leader has caused us, because we have the rules in the Senate, which I accept, has caused us to focus all of our attention on my friend trying to make sure that the President isn't reelected. We have spent months and months on things that were ordinary just like that. Funding the government. We had numerous CRs for very short periods of time. Finally, we were able to get that done. And then came the debt ceiling, and we spent 3 months on that. 3 months of wasting time here in the Senate. Never would we have done that before. As I indicated, and has been spread on the records of this body many, many times, Ronald Reagan, the debt ceiling was raised 18 times just like that. Also, Madam President, anyone that understands Washington, and there are a lot more people who understand Washington than the people in this chamber. My friend says, have him, me, go deal with the Speaker. Well, the issue there, Madam President, is kind of stunning how my friend has said this. Go talk to the Speaker. Everyone knows the Speaker can't move forward with any negotiations until this bill is defeated here. Period. Obviously, that's the case. The Speaker can't negotiate with me until this bill's killed. So I repeat, the spending bill that that my friend, the Republican leader, complains about is not completed. The issue facing the American people is whether they're going to have tax relief that the Democrats want to give them, or whether they're going to face a shutdown that was first made very unpopular by Newt Gingrich, and there's going to be another one that will be just as unpopular.
The original unanimous consent is still pending. Is there an objection? Objection is heard.
That's 2 hours. We'll both object just for good measure. Okay. Bipartisan objection. Would the chair announce the business for the day?
Under the previous order, there will now be a period of morning business for up to 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the second half of the time.
Madam President.
Senator from New York.
Madam President, I just listened with great eagerness to the discussion between the Majority Leader and the Republican Leader, and I'd like to make 2 points here, and then several subsidiary points. We need to do 2 things before we leave. We need to fund the government in a reasonable and rational way, and we need to help the middle class get tax relief because the middle class is suffering. We need to do both. And as Leader Reid said, to do both, you need both Democrats and Republicans to agree. If you try to do one without the other, you won't get anything done. And so last night, Speaker Boehner sent a bill on middle-class tax relief that was such a Christmas tree that we knew it couldn't pass, and he knew it couldn't pass. We know why he did it. He did it because he couldn't get enough Republican votes in his caucus without all of these killer amendments to get it through. He couldn't get it through without those amendments. So the Republican leader says, well, we know if it can't pass, why don't we start negotiating? There's one point here. We don't have to convince Speaker Boehner to start negotiating. He knows that. But we have to convince the 100 votes in his caucus who don't believe that we should give middle-class tax relief, who are wedded to these amendments that will kill the bill here in the Senate because they are so unpalatable. It's not 1 or 2 amendments. It's 10 or 12 or 15 amendments. We need to show them that, Madam Speaker, Madam President, could we have some order here? We need to show them, we need to show those 100 that this bill can't pass and that we have to give middle-class tax relief and we have to fund the government. So why wouldn't we vote on it now, dispose of it, and move on with the ultimate negotiations which will talk in tandem about funding the government long-term and middle-class tax relief? Now, why don't our colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to vote on that proposal? Is it because they fear embarrassing defections from their own side? Defections that would show once again how too many Republicans in the Senate don't want to extend middle-class tax relief no matter what is attached to it? That's not a good reason. What are we waiting for? The House bill is on a road to nowhere, so let's let the air out of the tires and then we can move on. We all know how it's going to end. Not with either chamber imposing its will on the other, but with a negotiation. So let's remove this bill from the floor, give Speaker Boehner some of the freedom he may need to negotiate, and get this all done. As again, Leader Reid said, and he said it so well, we can't pass the bills without both Democratic and Republican votes in the House and the Senate. And negotiating to come to an agreement makes ultimate sense. Now, I heard the Republican leader say, well, the government runs out by Friday. There's an easy way to deal with that, which Leader Reid asked for in a unanimous consent request and was rejected. Fund the government for a short period of time. So the logic here is to do 3 things. Vote on this bill, put it aside. fund the government for another short period of time, and then negotiate in earnest and produce both things America needs: an omnibus funding resolution that funds the government, that's been done very hard by the Appropriations Committee, deal with the outstanding issues in that proposal. There are still serious outstanding issues. Anyone who's been around here knows issues like Cuba and the environment and abortion in D.C. are not easy to settle and haven't been settled yet. So we vote on we kill the bill the House sent to us. We vote on it. It will die. We know it doesn't have the votes. It probably doesn't have even the unanimous support on the Republican side. I would bet that's pretty likely. Do a short-term CR, fund the government for a period of time, and have earnest negotiations that will produce both middle-class tax relief and a funding resolution for the government. We should negotiate the two measures together because, as the leader said, you can't pass them without both Democratic and Republican votes in either chamber. Obviously, in this chamber, there aren't 60 votes without Republican support, and in the other chamber, because too many people are against even the agreement, too many on the Republican side are against the agreement that we had for $1.04 trillion in spending, they will need Democratic votes.
Madam President, could I ask a question of the senator from New York?
I'd be happy to yield to my colleague.
Through the chair. I'm confused. The House passed a bill last night and has sent it to the Senate, correct?
That is correct.
And this is a Republican bill.
That is correct.
And we're ready to vote on it.
We are.
And the Republicans won't let us vote on it?
That is correct.
Oh, I'm confused.
So are we.
Why would the Republicans not let us vote on their bill?
One of the theories is that there is great dissension even on that bill among the Republican side, as there was on the previous bill that had middle-class tax relief in it.
I mean, that's why we vote, to determine whether there's
Agreed.
dissension.
The gentlelady, the senator from Missouri, is exactly correct. And if we voted, it would move the process of both funding the government, very important, and getting middle-class tax relief, also very important, forward.
Well, I would certainly urge every single senator, be they Democrat or Republican, to come to the floor and ask the question, why aren't we voting today on the bill that was passed by the House? We are ready to vote. You know, the American people don't get this game. The bill was passed in the House. Why aren't we voting? Why is the Republican Party blocking its own bill?
Senator from Missouri is, as usual, thoughtful, politically astute, and right down the middle, moderate. And it makes no sense to block it. It's holding up progress, particularly because the Republican House has to be shown that this bill is not going to be the answer, and the only way to both fund the government and provide middle-class relief is for Democrats and Republicans to get together, as the leader, as the Democratic leader has said, almost till he's blue in the face.
All due respect to my friend and colleague from New York, and I say I thank him for the answers because I was confused that the Republicans are keeping us from voting on the Republican bill, but it's not the House we need to show anything. And we have a tendency around here to get focused on the back and forth among ourselves. It's the American people that we need to show that we are capable of standing up, casting a vote, seeing whether it passes or fails, and then negotiating and finding a way forward. And I would say to my colleague from New York that if the Republicans in the Senate are not willing to vote on their own legislation, then you got to really scratch your head. And I thank the senator for the opportunity to answer that question.
Reclaiming my time, I would accept the modification of my argument made by the senator from Missouri. The point, of course, that we both agree on is we ought to vote. We ought to do it to show the world, whether it's House, Senate, American people, or anybody else. And that makes a great deal of sense. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
I'm from Illinois.
Madam President, I want to thank my colleague from New York and my colleague from Missouri for putting into context where we are today. But let's take one step back and look at what the issue is. The issue is basic. Will the payroll tax cut that currently helps 160 million Americans continue after January 1st? That's the underlying question. After all the back and forth in politics, we believe it should, the President believes it should. Economists tell us that's the way to help us out of the recession and create more jobs, and we have come up with a way to pay for it, so it won't add to the deficit. Our proposal? A surtax on the wealthiest Americans. Not on the first $1 million in income each year, but on their second $1 million in income. A surtax. And we asked across America, do you think that's fair to ask that sacrifice? Overwhelmingly, not just Democrats, independents, Republicans, Tea Party Republicans believe that's fair. But unfortunately, many on the Republican side are indentured political servants to a Washington lobbyist named Grover Norquist. They have signed an oath that they believe supersedes any other oath to the Constitution or to the people they represent, that they will never, ever, never vote for a tax increase for the wealthy. Not one penny. Not one penny. And so they want to stop the extension of this payroll tax cut for working families. They came up with a bill in the House of Representatives. The bill in the House of Representatives passed last night is so bad that the Senate Republicans won't let us bring it to the floor for a vote. They know what's going to happen. We saw it in the last 2 weeks. The presiding officer can remember. Senator Heller of Nevada put up a Republican alternative on the payroll tax cut, and on the first vote, out of 43 Republicans, 20 supported his measure. And out of the Republican leadership team, only Senator McConnell voted for it. Clearly, this is not a popular approach, even when it's written by Senate Republicans. Now the House Republican approach is so unpopular, they won't even call it on the floor. So unpopular. If anyone is wondering whether we're going to get home for Christmas, they should have listened to this exchange this morning, when the Republicans refused to even call their own vote. I agree with the senator from Missouri. We owe it to the American people to get to the bottom of this and quickly to assure them January 1st a payroll tax cut will continue for working families across America, to assure them that we will maintain unemployment benefits for the 14 million unemployed Americans struggling to find jobs, 4 unemployed for every available job. That is basic, that we need to do this. And if we're going to get down to it, then I'm afraid our Senate Republican colleagues have to accept a reality. There comes a moment for a vote. This is the moment, the vote on whether or not we are going forward to make sure that we extend the payroll tax cut for working families in a fair way. That is what it's hand. I might add, Madam President, that in about 30 minutes we'll have a rare chance on the floor of the Senate. Doesn't happen often. We'll have consideration of 2 efforts to amend the Constitution of the United States. We all take this seriously. Each one of us, before we could exercise our responsibility as senators, swore to uphold and defend that Constitution. And now we're being asked to amend it. How often have we amended the Constitution? In the past 220 years since we passed the Bill of Rights, 220 years, we have amended it 17 times. To abolish slavery, to give women the right to vote, significant historic decisions. What comes before us today are 2 amendments which, frankly, don't stand the test of whether they meet constitutional standards. I'm going to vote against both. I thank my colleague, Senator Udall of Colorado, for offering a version. Senator McConnell and Senator Hatch have offered their own. I don't believe that either one of them is the right thing for America. Here's what it comes down to. If we pass either of these constitutional amendments, we will be forced to cut government spending at exactly the wrong moment in time when it comes to our economy. When our economy is in trouble, revenues are down, we step in with stabilizers to try to make sure that we keep families afloat during difficult times and restore our economy to growth. Those stabilizers are threatened and endangered by these balanced budget amendments. Secondly, the enforcement of these balanced budget amendments will be by our federal courts. Can you imagine that the day after we pass a budget, lawsuits spring up across America in the federal courts challenging whether or not we have exceeded the constitutional requirement that no more than, say, 18% of the gross domestic product be spent? Arguments that there's been a miscalculation. How long will that take to resolve in court, and what happens to America in the meantime? And then what remedies do the courts have? The Republicans have made it clear, because of their view, one of the remedies cannot be extending taxes on the wealthiest in America. They never want that to happen. Now they want to enshrine that theory in the Constitution. Turning to our courts for enforcement of spending is, in my mind, a direct violation of the spirit and letter of the law in the Constitution, which gives to Congress exclusively the power of the purse. It is a bad idea. It is certainly not one that we should support. I also want to say that this approach is unnecessary. There comes a time, and we have reached it, when we need to have the political will in a bipartisan fashion to deal with our country's problems, whether it's the tax cut, extending the government's life into the next fiscal year, or dealing with our long-term deficit. It takes political will, maybe even political courage. It doesn't take a constitutional amendment. Let us defeat both of these amendments. Let us show our respect for this Constitution that we've sworn to uphold and defend, and not pass something that hasn't been thought through, that may in fact harm America rather than help it. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
While this quorum call is underway on the Senate floor, senators have been debating a couple of proposals to amend the Constitution to require a balanced federal budget. 8 hours of debate started yesterday, and that will come to a close in just a couple of minutes as they will hold votes on those measures this morning at 10:45 Eastern. You'll be able to see the outcome of those votes right here on C-SPAN 2. In the meantime, the House is in session this morning. Members are offering general speeches. They'll return for legislative business at noon Eastern. And today, their work is basically on a bill that extends the Social Security payroll tax cut, which provides some unemployment assistance and prevents scheduled cuts to Medicare payments to doctors. That bill also calling on the President to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. You can see live coverage of the House on our companion network, C-SPAN, and of course the Senate right here on C-SPAN 2.
The need for a balanced budget amendment is very, very great. You know how the national debt now is reaching a point where if we don't intervene with constitutional requirements for a balanced budget, it's going to become unsustainable. Statutes have not controlled deficit spending, and as an author of one of those statutes by former Senator Harry F. Byrd of Virginia and me as a member of the House back in 1979, and for 15 years that law was on the books, and never in those 15 years was there a balanced budget amendment. It makes very clear that laws will not control deficit spending. So I've concluded a long, long time ago, as I voted on previous constitutional amendments requiring a balanced budget that didn't pass, that a constitutional amendment is a must-be to provide Congress with the necessary discipline. The example right now in Europe of their fiscal and deficit situation is sobering. Nations that allow debt to grow out of control risk default, and one of those countries is practically in default. If we do not take effective corrective action, the European future could be ours, and sooner than we think. Each generation of Americans has enjoyed a brighter future than the previous generation. The failure of Congress to tame the deficit and the debt threatens this American dream for our children and grandchildren. The Constitution was designed to secure the blessings of liberty, not only for ourselves, but also for our children. So this makes this not just an economic issue, but a moral issue as well, a moral obligation to take action, and a constitutional amendment is not only a first step in that direction, but it's to make sure that the discipline is binding in future years. The balanced budget amendment will enforce a lower deficit. Members taking an oath to adhere to its provisions guarantee greater fiscal discipline than what we have without that constitutional provision. Taking an oath seriously, just as 46 state legislatures or state constitutions have requirements that their state legislature balance the budgets. And we all say that state legislatures and states are the political laboratory for our system of government. We ought to take the results of that laboratory and put them to use here at the federal level. So this resolution before us that I'm urging you to vote for is S.J.Res.10. There's been complaints that it would transfer to the courts the power of the purse, but that's a misreading of S.J.Res.10. The amendment prohibits the courts from raising taxes, and the doctrine of standing, the doctrine of ripeness, and the doctrine of political questions will prevent courts from deciding cases under the amendment. This is a lesson we should have learned, I think it was 1997, when this body failed by one vote, and I'm ashamed to tell you that was one Republican not voting for it, that we would have had such a constitutional requirement 15 years ago. But it didn't pass. If it had passed, we wouldn't be in this fiscal situation that we're in right now. So I urge my colleagues to vote for S.J.Res.10. I yield the floor.